Hi, I'm Maribel, and last weekend, I walked into my sister's wedding, the one I paid for, only to see a sign outside that said, "Fake donor, $3." Everyone laughed. Even my father stayed quiet. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside something snapped. You think humiliation ends when the music starts? No, that's where the real family truth began. The envelope came on a Monday, thick paper, gold trim, hand calligraphed. I knew right away it was from Taryn. I could almost smell her expensive perfume just looking at the wax seal. I sat at the kitchen table, hands still damp from rinsing dishes, and opened it slowly. Wedding invitation. Elegant. Precise. So her. But as my eyes scanned the list of names, hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Hal Whitmore, something tightened in my chest. No mention of me. Not even with support from. Just clean, white space where I thought I'd see my name. At first, I laughed. A little too loud for an empty kitchen. It's nothing, I muttered. Family doesn't keep score. But there it was, sitting in black ink, my erasure. Taryn was always the golden child, the organized one, the achiever. I was the helper, the youngest who stayed quiet, paid bills, showed up. I traced the raised lettering with my finger and whispered to no one. In every family, there's someone who loves too quietly to be remembered. And I had been that someone for far too long. You don't think about all the small things that pile up until they weigh you down. Like when Taryn called me, senior year, panicking about tuition shortfalls. I wired her the last of my savings without a second thought. No questions, just love. When Dad had his stroke, she couldn't fly down. Work, she said. I sat in that sterile hospital room for 10 days straight. Paid every co-pay. Drove him to therapy. Her first car? Signed over from me, the title changed in the DMV parking lot. She posted, "So grateful to the family," on Facebook. Never my name. Never mine. Back then, I told myself gratitude didn't need an audience. That maybe the point of love was to be invisible. But somewhere between those unpaid receipts and quiet sacrifices, I started to feel like a ghost in my own family. A presence felt but never named. I didn't need a thank you. But lately, it seemed like they'd forgotten I was even there. Taryn called the next day. "Hey, Maribel, so glad you got the invite. It's gorgeous, right?" "It is," I said, folding laundry with one hand and balancing the phone with the other. "So," she continued, breezy as always, "could you handle the sponsor logistics?" "I just don't have the bandwidth." I paused. "Sponsor logistics?" "You know," she said. "Venue, deposits, seating stuff. You're always so good at that. Our generous helper." There was a silence on my end. That word, helper, rattled like a loose nail in my gut. I swallowed it down. "Sure," I replied. "I'll take care of it." "Great. You're the best." She hung up, never asking how I was. I stared at the phone for a long time, wondering if she'd ever see me as more than a utility. A line item. A contact on speed dial when things went sideways. The Houston Garden Ballroom was busier than I expected that Thursday. Late afternoon heat still clung to the windows, casting a warm glaze over everything. I walked in holding my checkbook like armor. The receptionist greeted me politely. "Here to finalize for the wedding?" "Yes, for the Whitmore Manning event," I said, trying to sound calm. "Great. You must be the sponsor lady." "No, I'm the bride's sister." She blinked, paused, then nodded. "Oh, I thought you were. You know, the sponsor. The real family handles the guest list." I smiled tightly. "Right." I handed over the check, heart thudding harder than it should. Her words buzzed in my ears. The real family. My name wasn't on the invite. I wasn't listed as host. I wasn't even seen as family here. Just the lady with the pen. The drive home was quiet. No music, just the hum of the AC in my thoughts. Dad used to say, "Don't measure your worth by other people's silence." I repeated that in my head like a prayer. But another voice crept in. One I'd buried for years. Maybe silence is exactly how they erase you. At home, I tucked the receipt under the "Family First" magnet on my fridge. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. What a cruel little slogan. I wanted to believe in it. I still did, somewhere deep down. But lately, it felt like I was clinging to a story no one else remembered. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, wrapping a handkerchief I'd embroidered myself. It read, simply, grateful. My hands moved slowly, folding the cloth into soft layers before sealing the envelope. Maybe this time they'll see me, I whispered. I caught my reflection in the mirror, half in shadow, half in lamplight. My face looked calm, but my eyes held something harder. A glint of awareness, maybe even defiance. The next morning, I slipped the envelope into the mailbox. The red flag clicked upward. Then slowly, gravity pulled it back down. And just like that, it was out of my hands. But the real message waiting for me wasn't in the mail. It was hanging outside the venue. The sky was already hot when I pulled into the parking lot. Texas heat has a way of wrapping around you, slow and heavy, like it's daring you to stay calm. I parked in the far corner. It felt like the kind of day that would demand distance from everything. The rehearsal dinner was set for 6. I showed up at 4. Old habit. I always believed if you arrived early, you could steer things right before they turned sideways. The venue staff were friendly but casual, calling me Maribel, like I was a regular vendor, not the woman who signed the check to keep this place booked. No, miss, no, ma'am, no, bride's sister. Just my first name, tossed around like I worked catering. It's not about me, I reminded myself. I didn't come for recognition, I came for my sister. The ballroom smelled like roses and lemon wax. White folding chairs, tablecloths perfectly steamed, candles unlit. The calm before something. Always the calm. A small boy walked past, maybe 5 or 6. Blonde, sticky fingers, holding a juice box. He pointed at me. Are you the fake donor lady? He asked, curious more than cruel. I froze. What did you say, sweetheart? He looked outside. The sign says so. I followed his gaze. And that's when everything cracked. Outside, near the entry arch, above the floral arrangement and next to a tower of champagne glasses, hung a welcome banner in gold script. Thank you to our fake donor -$3. That's all it said. No name. Just those 6 words, said in looping calligraphy like a wedding vow. I stood still, my breath suddenly thick in my throat. The words felt louder than the traffic, sharper than the heat. A joke? A message? A warning? Taryn's laugh cut through the air before I could gather my thoughts. She walked up behind me, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Isn't it cute? She said, sipping iced tea. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Her voice lowered, syrupy sweet. Just a bit of fun. Lighten up. I looked at her then. Was this your idea? She smirked. You take things so personally. It's a running joke in the family, you always act like a martyr. Thought we'd call it out. My voice was flat. What part was the joke? The $3 or calling me fake? She shrugged. You've always been in the background, Maribel. That's what you do. You help quietly. You're good at it. It landed harder than she probably meant it to. Not because it was new, but because it wasn't. It confirmed something I'd feared for years. The silence wasn't neglect. It was policy. People started arriving. Cousins, old neighbors, friends of friends. The laughter floated in. A few glanced at the sign. One woman, holding a glass of wine, muttered under her breath, well, that's one way to call out cheap family. I heard my name mentioned off to the side. Not directly, but enough. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I stepped back, adjusted the strap of my purse, and said softly, noted. You learn something standing in that kind of spotlight, where the humor is sharp enough to wound, but dull enough to pass for normal. In American families, disrespect is often dressed in humor. Later, I caught Taryn laughing with her fiancé by the buffet line. I approached one last time, calm on the outside. I just want to be clear, I said. You signed off on that banner? She didn't even flinch. You need to grow up. Nobody even thinks it's about you. I nodded slowly. It's not about me, I echoed. Then I walked away, through the kitchen door, past the silver trays and clanging pans, until I found the prep room in the back. I sat down on a folding chair and pulled out my phone. Scrolled back through the photos until I found it, a picture of the check I'd written 2 weeks ago. My signature, my handwriting, right there. You want fake? I whispered. Let's make it real then. I leaned forward to grab a water bottle and noticed something behind it, the embroidered handkerchief I'd gifted yesterday. The one that said, grateful. They hadn't even opened the envelope. It was crumpled beside a half-eaten muffin. I didn't touch it. just stared at it. Then I stood up and walked out without a word. Dinner went on. Toasts were made. Music played. I stayed in the back, near the staff exit, sipping water from a plastic cup. Someone tapped my arm. "Are you the sponsor?" a woman asked, pointing at the sign out front. I smiled. Apparently, I'm worth $3. That's more than I thought I meant to them. But what they didn't know was, I had just written a second check for something they'd never expect. The lull after the dinner was a mistake. I should have known better than to relax. The laughter from the ballroom echoed in the hallway as I collected my things in the dressing area. It caught my ear when someone outside mentioned me. "She's the fake donor." Another voice snickered, $3. I froze, hand on the garment rack, watching my reflection catch in the window. Calm face, trembling hands. I breathed in slow. Age doesn't teach you to stop hurting, it teaches you how to hide it better. I glanced at my phone, pretending to scroll social media, but the chatter had begun. I left the room to grab water and found a woman leaning in toward a staff member. The look passed between them, knowing. My name was already footnote gossip in the back rooms. A few minutes later Rosa, a coordinator I'd met earlier, appeared at the door. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was told to reduce the sponsor name, to avoid confusion." My gut clenched. "Who gave that order?" I asked. Her voice wavered. "Ben Hawthorne, my sister's fiancé. This was no harmless prank. This was planned." I nodded and slipped her a $20 tip. "You didn't do anything wrong by telling the truth," I whispered. The money felt heavier than the check I'd written. That's dignity, they didn't get to cheapen it. At the bar I found a corner seat, not quite hidden. I heard snippets. Dramatic much? Trying to buy affection again. A cousin approached someone else. I recognized the tone. Taryn said Maribel didn't pay what she claimed. I clenched the strap of my purse. I listened. I let it. If they were comfortable lying about me, it meant I'd never made them afraid of the truth. I took mental notes. Footnotes in fact became my ammo. I sat back and looked at the photo of the check on my phone, memo line, venue deposit. Then I overheard Ben boasting to friends. That donation went to our honeymoon fund. Shock hit me in wave form. The joke wasn't only about erasure. They'd redirected my money. They didn't just erase me, they funded their getaway with my check. I stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room, no tears. No implosion, just the electric clarity of what I needed to do. Later that night, I drove home. The streets were quiet. Houston's lights glowed beyond the windshield and the radio was off. I let the silence speak. Some debts can't be paid in money. They're collected in moments of truth. I thought of the folder at home, email printouts, receipts, everything I had. Truth always surfaces. That billboard outside the freeway flickered at me like a sign. At home I knew what I'd do next. I laid the documents on the kitchen table, the check, the invoice emails, bank records. My fridge still held the "Family First" magnet staring back. I touched it and smiled faintly. Not out of joy, out of resolution. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the venue manager. "Please provide documentation of sponsorship attribution." My fingers didn't shake. I whispered into the quiet kitchen, "Tomorrow, I'll make them remember the name they tried to erase." The lounge was dim when I stepped in, the air conditioned too strong, the hum too smooth. A private rehearsal dinner in Houston, not in the main ballroom, but tucked away in that side wing where family discussions happen behind velvet curtains. The table had a printed card, with gratitude to our supportive sponsor. No name, just the words, my name, gone. I stood for a moment, in front of it, wondering whether to pull it off the table or walk past without reaction. My father's voice rang in my head, "If you keep quiet in hopes of peace, you'll become the peace they exploit." I settled into a corner chair and watched the card like a quiet threat. People arrived. My sister, Taryn, greeted guests at the door, her smile sharp in the candle-lit space. I approached the table, extended my hand to my new brother-in-law, Grady Hawthorne. He looked me up and down, nodded curtly, and turned to hold Taryn's hand instead. That silence spoke louder than any speech could. "You do not belong here." I forced myself not to recoil. In American families, the loudest message is often the one left unspoken, I thought. My pulse slowed. I reminded myself I was smarter than this dynamic. I waited. Later, my father found me at the back near the coffee station. "Don't push this," he whispered, his tone tight with fear, not for me, but for what might happen to him. "It's not what they want." He wasn't protecting me, he was protecting the status quo. Within those 5 words I recognized his surrender. I didn't feel anger, I felt a hard, quiet resolve grow. If they wouldn't recognize me, I would redefine what recognition needs to be. That night, I returned to my apartment, opened the file folder where I'd stored every receipt, every check stub, every email confirmation. I lined them up on my kitchen table, under the leftover, "Family First" magnet still stuck to the fridge. I drafted a respectful email. "Please confirm that the funds you received from DOS Family Sponsorship are appropriately recorded." I paused. I did not send it yet. Facts first. Words later. I lit no candles, made no statement. I simply set my terms. I will decide who I am now. At midnight, when the house was dark and all I heard was my own breathing, my phone buzzed. A photograph from an unknown number. A framed card displayed at the hotel lobby's sponsor board. Family sponsors, no names beneath, a tiny footnote in the corner. $3 donor. The image felt heavy. It broadcast what they believed I was. I stared at the screen, then at the receipt underneath my fridge magnet. I shut the laptop. The ledger would speak soon. Tomorrow I speak. The morning sunlight filtered through the hotel suite blinds, gentle, but it felt cold to me. A knock echoed on the door. I opened it to find a folded envelope with the couple's emblem. I glanced inside, my schedule for the day, my name missing from the seating chart. No, DOS family, no, Maribel, just blank space. I sipped my coffee in the quiet room, letting the absence wrap around me like a second skin. Taryn hadn't called. Ben hadn't texted. What had changed overnight wasn't the guest list, it was my relevance. Neglect isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence that scouts your worth. I remembered something a therapist once said: neglect is just cruelty with clean hands. I stared at the itinerary others received while I stayed in the shadows. The air held the chill of pretending. I arrived at the venue ahead of the crowd, walking through the grand foyer while staff arranged name cards and floral displays. Grady greeted me with a nod, calling me Miss Doss. No warmth, no sisterly handshake, no acknowledgement that I was the one paying for this hall. A junior planner handed me a hanger and said they'd moved my dressing room away from the family room. My gown lay wrinkled, neglected on a cheap hanger. "There was a misunderstanding about your role today," she stammered. I paused. "There's no misunderstanding," I said softly. "Just avoidance dressed as professionalism." In American families, the loudest message is often the one left unspoken. I watched their faces shift when I stood steady, not wounded, just present. I wasn't invisible anymore. At the welcome table, Aunt Coral sidled up and offered a compliment. "You almost look like a real part of the family today." I forced a smile. Then I heard someone joke, "Did you finally forgive them for the donor thing?" The laughter followed. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I felt the tight coil of anger. Some apologies never come, and some aren't worth hearing. I made mental notes, not tearful pleas. I observed who watched me instead of speaking to me. I noted programming staff whispering, guests glancing. Double-edged, nice words, woven with poison. The chair I sat on felt too hard and too hollow. I found a quiet moment during prep hour to speak with the assistant manager of the venue. She pulled me aside. "Your check came in but credited to the groom's father's fund," she said softly. My breath caught. My name didn't appear anywhere. The invoice copy she handed me was blank under sponsor name. The words hovered between us. "It's not personal," she said. I replied, "That's the problem. You made my generosity impersonal." That felt heavy. Searing disbelief twisting into moral indignation. I realized this wasn't oversight, it was erasure. They bought a story without crediting the author. I tucked the invoice into my clutch. Back in the dressing room I sat, applied my makeup slowly, not to hide tears, but to align my face with the person I had decided to become. I typed a short text to Taryn: "I'll attend, but I won't enable this." Then I deleted the long message I'd started, filled with receipts, proof, hurt. I slapped the phone to silence and told myself, presence is enough, but silence will speak volumes. I said quietly, "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I gathered my purse and walked back out. The ceremony music began. I entered the hall, took a front row seat, purposefully, not where they assigned me. Heads turned. I met each gaze calmly. Someone near me rifled through the program and pointed. My name was still absent from the sponsor list. Perfect omission. I locked eyes with one guest and let the moment hold. I was quiet, still, but I was there. And next time, people would remember. That morning I sat at my desk in my small home office in Austin, coffee steaming beside me, and opened the spreadsheet I had avoided for weeks. Every payment I'd made for the wedding. Venue deposit, florals, catering, all lined up in order. Then I downloaded the vendor invoices, side by side. And there it was, the DOS family sponsorship line missing from the publicly posted data. Money flowed, recognition diverted. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and remembered Dad's favorite phrase, "In the US, what you pay for might cost you your dignity if you don't claim it." I exhaled slowly. Numbers don't lie, people do. And on that screen I saw the truth I'd ignored. I paused at exactly 9:17 a.m. I drafted an email to the venue manager. "Please provide documentation showing how my funds were credited for the wedding sponsorship," I wrote calmly, attaching images of my check, bank record, everything. Sent. I watched the cursor spin. I told myself, power isn't taking the mic, it's owning the ledger. I felt the shift. I was no longer in wait mode. Later that afternoon I called Nellie Crane at the bank's trust department. Her voice was polite, too polite. "Your payment has been labeled non-refundable contribution to Hawthorne Legacy Fund." I said nothing for half a second. "Why is my name not listed?" I asked. She hesitated. "That's internal protocol," she said finally. "Donor recognition may be omitted at organizer's discretion." I tucked that phrase into my memory. At that moment clarity hit. They weren't just erasing me, they had redirected the story. The contract had been constructed to liberate them from naming me. My money funded their image. I sat back in my chair, still, while fire worked in my chest. Back at home I looked at the fridge magnet, "Family First." I pulled the payment receipt free and placed it beneath the magnet, took a photo and sent it to Darla with a simple message: "Receipt doesn't fit their narrative." The paper felt rigid in my hands. This was my anchor. When they erased your name, keep your receipt. I drafted a post in a private folder. When generosity becomes invisible, it's time to rewrite the story. I set reminders. Vendor email responses by 5 p.m., bank contract review by Friday. I resolved, if I didn't receive acknowledgement by the evening after the wedding, I'd leave early. I enabled my phone's recorder. The quiet before the storm felt electric. Just as I shut the laptop, a ping arrived. Subject line: sponsorship credit, urgent. 2 attachments named ledger_entry_2025.pdf and meeting_request_sep10.pdf. My finger hovered over open. Hours ahead would press whether I stayed invisible or became the story. The program lay on the table beneath warm lighting, large, glossy, the kind that makes everything seem official. I found mine at my seat, flipped it open, and my eyes went straight to the sponsors, Hawthorne and Friends, line. No mention of DOS family. The word friends was printed in smaller, gray italic type, like an afterthought stuck in after the names. I sat there as family members laughed across the room, unaware of how that tiny difference felt like a knife twisting in slow motion. I recalled a mentor telling me, mistakes can be innocent, but patterns are always purposeful. That stuck. I snapped a photo of the program, quietly, tucking it into my phone's memory. Something had just shifted. During cocktail hour the big screens flickered to life. A highlight reel, footage from the rehearsal dinner, the ceremony setup, the laughter, the bridesmaids. The title flashed, Celebrating the Hawthorne Family. A sidebar said, "Special thanks to our supporters." My donation appeared for a split second, a blurred figure handing over a check. No name, no caption, just a fleeting image. The message was clear: you can fund it, and still be invisible. My chest tightened. I leaned back in my chair, stilled myself. Cold clarity settled in. I knew now how I'd move forward. My phone buzzed. A message from Darla. voice note attached. I played it discreetly through my earbuds, event staff admitting. They removed the DOS credits so the board looked clean. I exhaled. My fingers hovered over the mic, then I stood up. I walked to the center of the lounge, tapped the microphone gently. The room hushes, music fades, conversations stop. I'm Maribel Das, proud sponsor of this event. My name was removed. That ends tonight. The words landed heavy. Cameras pointed. A silence stretched. It only took seconds for the mood to shift. My sister's laugh faded. My mother's smile froze. Guests shifted in their seats. Some tablets flicked open for photos. A guest whispered. Finally, someone said the quiet part out loud. I watched the room divide, some eyes relieved, others embarrassed. I felt a mix of triumph and relief. Because recognition isn't a favor, it's accountability. Later, by the reception desk, the ledger, a printout pinned to the board, caught my eye. I walked over, placed my hand on a man's shoulder. Page 22, your honeymoon fund, I said softly. The page flipped. The hum of the room slowed. The ledger now spoke of diversion, omission, intent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture wildly. I just stood there, quiet but firm. The room held its breath. They have a choice now. Sign the acknowledgement or face exposure. I wasn't silent anymore. I woke up slower than usual. No alarms. No dress fittings. Just the soft hum of the city outside my window and the glow of morning light trying to sneak through the blinds. I reached for my phone, dozens of messages stacked up like bricks waiting to build something I wasn't sure I wanted. Missed calls, mentions, DMs from strangers. One headline read, "The woman who reclaimed her name." Another, a sister's silence, finally broken. And then there was the clip, me, standing calm, voice steady, announcing myself into a microphone they never meant for me to touch. The video had gone semi-viral overnight. I scrolled slowly, reading things like, families should never silence gratitude. Classy, powerful, necessary. Taryn's name flashed on my screen. I didn't answer. I let it ring until silence reclaimed its space. Sometimes, silence isn't avoidance, it's closure. Later that morning, I met my father at a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the neighborhood. It wasn't fancy. Didn't need to be. He was already sitting there, stirring his coffee like it was the only thing keeping his hands busy. When I sat, he looked up but didn't speak right away. You made your point, Maribel, he finally said. But was it worth it? I didn't flinch. I stirred my tea, met his gaze. Truth doesn't ruin families, Dad. Lies do. His shoulders sagged, not from offense, but from the weight of knowing I was right. I was scared they'd cut me off, he admitted. I nodded. Then maybe it's time to let them. He didn't argue, just stared into his cup like it held the years he'd lost trying to keep peace by pleasing the loudest people in the room. And I didn't need him to say more. Sometimes understanding isn't loud, it just sits beside you, finally still. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was the venue manager. Her voice was careful, polished, but you could hear it, something had shifted. We've updated the sponsor list publicly. Your name is listed correctly now. We're issuing new wedding credits and have submitted the change online. I paused, then said, correction doesn't erase harm. But it's a start. She hesitated. You taught us something about fairness today. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the words settle in. I didn't just reclaim a spot on a printed program, I pulled back a curtain on a whole system. Later that afternoon, Taryn posted a public apology on social media. To my sister Maribel, I should have credited you properly. I let pride get in the way. I'm sorry. I read it once. That was enough. No tears. No screen grabs. Just closure. Acknowledgement doesn't fix everything, but it stops the bleeding. I didn't respond. My reply would be silence, because for the first time, I had nothing left to prove. Back home, I pulled out the printed ledger from my bag. Folded it slowly and placed it into a small memory box on the shelf labeled, things that tried to define me. Then I walked to the fridge, removed the old magnet that read, Family First, and replaced it with one that said, Define Yourself First. Darla called as I was brewing tea. Her voice came through bright and bold. You changed the story, Mari. I smiled and said, no, I just stopped letting them write it for me. I sat with that thought for a long time. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering, without the pain. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was light, the kind that doesn't press on your chest. A delivery van pulled up, one of those last-minute evening drops. The driver handed me a small envelope sealed with the Hawthorne family crest. Inside, a check refunding part of my contribution and a note that read, "Let's start over." I held it for a moment. Then, without hesitation, I tore it clean in half. There are some debts you don't collect, because peace is worth more. I looked out toward the trees, their tops brushed with golden light. And this time, I wasn't attending someone else's story. I was living mine. I woke up slower than usual. No alarms, no dress fittings, just the soft hum of the city outside my window and the glow of morning light trying to sneak through the blinds. I reached for my phone, dozens of messages stacked up like bricks waiting to build something I wasn't sure I wanted. Missed calls, mentions, DMs from strangers. One headline read, "The woman who reclaimed her name." Another, "A sister's silence, finally broken." And then there was the clip, me, standing calm, voice steady, announcing myself into a microphone they never meant for me to touch. The video had gone semi-viral overnight. I scrolled slowly, reading things like, "Families should never silence gratitude. Classy, powerful, necessary." Taryn's name flashed on my screen. I didn't answer. I let it ring until silence reclaimed its space. Sometimes, silence isn't avoidance, it's closure. Later that morning, I met my father at a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the neighborhood. It wasn't fancy. Didn't need to be. He was already sitting there, stirring his coffee like it was the only thing keeping his hands busy. When I sat, he looked up but didn't speak right away. "You made your point, Maribel," he finally said. "But was it worth it?" I didn't flinch. I stirred my tea, met his gaze. "Truth doesn't ruin families, Dad. Lies do." His shoulders sagged, not from offense, but from the weight of knowing I was right. "I was scared they'd cut me off," he admitted. I nodded. "Then maybe it's time to let them." He didn't argue, just stared into his cup like it held the years he'd lost trying to keep peace by pleasing the loudest people in the room. And I didn't need him to say more. Sometimes understanding isn't loud, it just sits beside you, finally still. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was the venue manager. Her voice was careful, polished, but you could hear it, something had shifted. "We've updated the sponsor list publicly. Your name is listed correctly now. We're issuing new wedding credits and have submitted the change online." I paused, then said, "Correction doesn't erase harm. But it's a start." She hesitated. "You taught us something about fairness today." I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the words settle in. I didn't just reclaim a spot on a printed program, I pulled back a curtain on a whole system. Later that afternoon, Taryn posted a public apology on social media. "To my sister Maribel, I should have credited you properly. I let pride get in the way. I'm sorry." I read it once. That was enough. No tears, no screen grabs, just closure. Acknowledgement doesn't fix everything, but it stops the bleeding. I didn't respond. My reply would be silence, because for the first time, I had nothing left to prove. Back home, I pulled out the printed ledger from my bag. Folded it slowly and placed it into a small memory box on the shelf labeled, "Things that tried to define me." Then I walked to the fridge, removed the old magnet that read, "Family First," and replaced it with one that said, "Define Yourself First." Darla called as I was brewing tea. Her voice came through bright and bold. "You changed the story, Mari." I smiled and said, "No, I just stopped letting them write it for me." I sat with that thought for a long time. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering, without the pain. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was light, the kind that doesn't press on your chest. A delivery van pulled up, one of those last-minute evening drops. The driver handed me a small envelope sealed with the Hawthorne family crest. Inside, a check refunding part of my contribution and a note that read, "Let's start over." I held it for a moment. Then, without hesitation, I tore it clean in half. There are some debts you don't collect, because peace is worth more. I looked out toward the trees, their tops brushed with golden light. And this time, I wasn't attending someone else's story. I was living mine.